Hello, messy families. Thanks for joining us today. It is a beautiful day in the neighborhood, and we're so glad you joined us today.
You need a song like "It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood." I will not even. Day for it.
I will not compete with the great late.
Would you be mine,
Mr. Rogers?
Would you be mine?
So
every time he says that, I've just always tempted to do that. I'm sorry. I couldn't help myself today.
I did not know how great the temptation was, and that you yielded.
I know. I always think of like, where is that from? It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood.
You didn't know
that's
that?
what it's from. Is that why you say that? Because
Absolutely.
of Mr. Rogers?
100%.
Okay. So all of you people who have no idea who Mr. Rogers is, you need to go look him up. He's from Pittsburgh. I grew up watching Mr. Rogers.
National televised.
Yes. I learned a lot from Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, back
I learned
in the good old
you
days.
can never go down. You can never go down. You can never go down the drain. Because I guess kids were really afraid that they would fall through the drain when in the bathtub.
I didn't.
He literally sang that song.
I did not know that.
Yes.
That was not a fear or
so
phobia
many songs.
that
I maybe at the beginning of every podcast, I will sing one song from Mr. Rogers.
No, that's okay. You let us know. If you want to hear it, we'll give the people what they want.
There's lots of lessons. There's lots of lessons.
I don't think
some more important than you can never go down the drain. But anyway, but lots of other things too.
Okay. Well,
yes,
I'm hoping it is still a beautiful day in your neighborhood.
Yes. Okay.
And
continuing.
And so this is, I can't remember if we did it in the last episode or not, but we are in our big annual end of the year fundraising campaign.
That's right.
The work that we do, I won't belabor it because I know you're listening and you think this is just a great podcast. But it is so much more than just an awesome, hopefully in your perspective, podcast.
Helpful podcast.
Yeah. But we reach now upwards of 50,000 families every month, or at least downloads of our show. Mm-hmm. And we are also offering tons of free guides and resources for marriages, in addition to beginning to offer now 4 different courses for parents and getaways, and
there's always more. There's always more, like, because we really feel like families need so much support, so many resources, and we're looking out and we don't see other people doing this. So we're just going to do it. So we're working on some courses. I'm not going to talk about it too much because they have not been fully put into place yet and vetted, but we will have courses that we're going to serve parents from kids at all different ages.
That's right. That's right.
And but to develop them, that takes time. We have to pay for graphic designers. We pay for videographers. We have to pay ourselves because we don't have other jobs. This is all we do. And our listeners' support for this ministry makes the magic happen.
Yeah. So if you care about marriages and families, and want to help strengthen
or hey, if you hate families you don't want to strengthen families, then don't donate.
No, I didn't mean it that. It's not a guilt trip, but it's like, I think we're doing some pretty exciting things.
Absolutely.
If you want to hear more, we actually, we won't reference it now, but for those
because we haven't recorded it. Go ahead. Sorry. I thought you were going to say the video, the fundraising video. No. I was like, we haven't done that yet. I'm sorry. I'll shut up now. I really haven't been day drinking, guys. I promise.
All right. Well, anyway, but we wrote this. We shared this beautiful story of a couple and the and the path that they kind of got out of the crisis that they were in, and how we were honored to be a listener
story,
part of their story. Anyway, so you can read that on our website. You can go to messyfamilyproject.org and you'll see there, hit the give button and you see some stories.
But I think the
reasons we're doing what we're doing and the plans that we have, as well as some thank you gifts for those who do.
Well,
donate.
I think what I was going to say about the story is that I think the reason the story is important is because it's this one family story, but it's a story that we've heard over and over again.
Yeah.
It's not just their story.
That's right.
I think it's a lot of people's story. And like you were saying, the gifts and all of that, we have new stuff. We teamed up with Catholic Family Crate. They have provided us with some amazing gifts for our listeners. In addition to our own little messy family spin on things, yes, Mike is nicely modeling for you as one of the gifts. But even in our new Advent and Christmas box, they are different this year than they've ever been before. So if you're like, oh, I've gotten the Advent box before, it's different this year because of the talents of our friends at Catholic Family Crate.
All
So
right.
check it out.
Okay. So check it out. All right. All right. So,
Lots of cultural references for this episode.
all right. So we are talking about the challenge that some of you may have experienced. But we'll start off with the people we just don't want to talk to. People whose kids have never had a meltdown. They've never had a tantrum. Really? either you're lying or we just don't like you very much.
There are people.
That's all.
There are people whose kids, because if you think about it, really, Katie and Patrick, our two oldest kids, did not have a lot of temper tantrums. They were fairly easygoing.
True.
And then we had our daughter, Maura. And I don't think she would be embarrassed to say this, but then we found out what temper tantrums really were.
Yeah, but she wasn't that bad. It got worse later.
But the point is that there's certain personality types whose kids are those kids who are more prone to having temper tantrums, and some
say
are
that
not.
I hate those films. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think those people who don't admit it, or those people whose maybe their kids have temper tantrums, but they don't have them in public. But our kids, we've definitely experienced that. I have absolutely left the grocery store after having a whole bunch of groceries in the grocery cart and having a kid having a meltdown and just having to abandon the cart. Like, abort mission, and just go to the car. We've definitely had left church with a child who was screaming so loud, like literally the priest stopped talking. And I know the priests hesitate to do that because they don't want to make people feel bad. But guys, it was really that bad. I mean, it was that bad. And even recently, we have had children living in our house who have had temper tantrums.
That's right.
And they're not toddlers anymore. So this happens. It's a reality.
And so we've been there. And so if you haven't experienced that, awesome, great. Hopefully you will not ever experience that. But the reality is that our kids at different phases, particularly in the toddler age range.
And what do you mean by temper tantrum?
Tantrum is simple, right? They have a meltdown. They lose their emotional crap. Let's think of like kicking, screaming, rolling around on the ground.
Common terms for temper tantrums: meltdown, losing their bleep, explosion. Trying to
emotional explosions.
Yes, emotional volcanoes, outbursts. Yes, exactly. All of those things.
And it can be long or short. I mean, some kids have a temper tantrum and it's only 20, 30 seconds. But there are others that can go on for hours. And that's the reality, is that it can be anywhere in that spectrum. And again, every kid is different. Every family dynamic, probably personality and family can kind of handle that differently. And what we want to give are basically four key points,
right?
4 ways that we want to encourage you as a parent. I don't know if they're strategies or tactics.
I think they're tactics. I think this is a tactical podcast.
Yeah. So we want to get
sometimes
practical.
We talk about theory and then we kind of go practical. But you know what? This whole podcast is tactical.
Right. We'll go right into it.
We're going to get right into it or most of this podcast, I say, because of course you always have to give some kind of like ideas around it.
Right.
But the reason we're going to talk about this too is because it's a very common question.
Yeah.
It's a very common question people email us about.
And it's a frustration.
And it is a frustration. And the reason we say that about we hate people who don't say their kids have temper tantrums is obviously not really. But the point is that I want parents to know they're not alone. Yeah. Because when people email us about their kids having a temper tantrum,
they're embarrassed by it.
But I think a lot of times they ask this question in the way that they feel like my child is the only child who ever does this.
Right.
And I just want them to know that's not true.
Right.
It's okay.
We actually have a marriage and family ministry, and we have kids who don't follow that perfect pattern, right?
Children are
Which
not.
is one of the reasons we call ourselves the messy family project.
Yes.
This is not the perfect parenting.
And I
show.
think, and just the one overall abstract points that I would like to make is that emotions are good. Emotions and parents, we have to realize this about ourselves. And we have to realize this about our children, that emotions are not good or bad. They just are. And we don't want to send a message to our child that your emotions are bad.
Yeah.
You shouldn't feel that way. That can be very harmful because we as adults, what does it mean to maturity? What is maturity? Maturity means integration.
Right.
Right? It's integration where my heart, my mind, my will, so my heart meaning my emotions, my mind and my will are all working together for my good. And that's what we want for our child.
Yeah.
So we never want to send, even in the midst of temper tantrums, that their emotions are bad.
And just recognizing that heart, that mind, that will are all gifts, right? They are
yes,
good.
their emotions are a gift.
It is a gift of God.
Yes.
And it's for the good of the human person.
Right.
God designed it that way. And our goal as parents is to help our children get to a place where they are in mastery of their heart, their mind, and their will, that they are in charge as opposed to any one of them. And we won't talk about the other two for today, meaning the will and the mind. But right now we're looking at, these emotional, uncontrolled outbursts that cause havoc, right? Because we're talking about both helping the formation of the...
Like a good thing to remember about emotions is that you don't want them driving the car, but you don't want to stuff them in the trunk either. Okay. So that's a really easy thing for you all to remember, is that it's one, it has to be, it can't be either one of those things.
Right. And we also have to put all of this in the context of the family, right? We're raising our kids in the midst of a community. And the home is a place where they learn how to get along with people, how to mature, how to grow. And when there is a one child who is disrupting the rest, and one, it's not good for them. It's not good for mom and dad, but it's also not good for your family.
Right.
And so recognizing that there are strategies, these 4 tactics, if you will, for parents to approach tantrums. So let's get right into it.
Okay.
And they're all going to be D's here. Make it easy to remember.
That's right. And I really want everybody who's listening to remember these 4 D words. And there's other words. There's one D word that you may want to say during a tantrum, but that's not one of our 4 words. But I want you to remember these 4 words, and I want you to talk about them with your spouse.
Right.
I want you guys to have a conversation about this, because this is very important that
you're on the same page.
That both of you are on the same page in dealing with this. There's another D word, right? They're all going to come out. Okay. So number 1, when your child is having a tantrum, the first thing you want to do is determine.
Right.
Determine. Ask the question, why? Why is this child flipping out?
Right.
And I think and we're going to, a couple times during this, refer back to our podcast that we did with Maggie Radzik, because Maggie talked about toddlers. And I think that what that podcast, one of the reasons it was so helpful is that she wants to help parents get into the mind of a toddler, or a child. And by the way, these are not just about toddlers. These are about teenagers, really, elementary, all different. But
right. And because tantrums, you usually restrict to the toddler years. However,
because they happen more often with toddlers.
But the reality is that there is an emotional control issue that happens later on. And some children are more prone to it than others.
Exactly. So you want to give your example about the stroller thing?
Yes. So we were traveling at an amusement park, and we maybe shared that. I know we shared this in a talk. I can't remember if it was in a podcast.
We get confused about our podcasts and our talks.
But we were traveling behind a young couple with their baby in a stroller, and what they didn't see is or a toddler, and the toddlers, I don't know if it was Mickey Mouse or some stuffed animal or whatever, fell out of the stroller, and the child starts freaking out. Now we're walking behind, we see what happened. We pick up the stuffed animal, and the parents are getting really, why is this child freaking out? I don't know what happened.
Or stop crying. You know,
and
what's
they're trying
problem?
To just like
blah,
address
blah, blah, blah,
it,
blah.
like hitting it directly on, fighting in a way with the emotional thing of the child. Now we came over, brought the stuffed animal, and the child calmed down.
Right.
And the reason we use this little story is that what is happening from the eyes of the child?
Right.
You know, maybe there is something dramatic that happened. Maybe they lost a stuffed animal. Maybe there was something that was taken away from them. Maybe there was something that they had a desire for. Again, even if it's wrong, but to see from their perspective, what is the deeper reason? What is going on here? We're not looking for, when I say deeper, I shouldn't mean, it's not like we're looking for an existential crisis going on with our toddler, right?
No, but then the whole halt thing.
Yeah. So like, is your child hungry, angry, lonely, tired? Like what they always say that those are the 4 things that you should not make a decision for an adult. If you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, those are halts. Don't do that. But for your child,
it's true for little ones as well.
Are they hungry? Do they need something?
Yeah.
Are they angry because they lost their toy or someone took something away from them? Are they just looking for some attention?
Do they want attention? Yeah.
And then, or are they tired?
Right.
Do they need a nap? Right. Like what's going on? So assessing that idea of determine what's going on. What's happening from the eyes of the child.
And one thing to remember, one of the reasons that temper tantrums are so frequent with toddlers is because they don't have the ability to speak.
That's right.
And so often toddlers get frustrated because they cannot communicate what they want. And even older kids who can speak, maybe they can't put into words how they're feeling at that moment. So I think it's so good for parents to have empathy. There was this one time we were on a family vacation and I got laryngitis. I lost my voice. I literally could not speak for like 2 days.
It was actually really a fun time of miming.
But to be with my family, like my brothers and sisters, and this was like once every other year that we do this. It's not like it's all the time. And there's nothing else that I wanted more than just sit around and talk with people. And to have my voice taken away from me during that time, it was so frustrating to not be able to communicate. And we have to realize that that's what our toddlers are going through. They are living life like that.
Right.
Have you ever been with a toddler where you're like, they're trying to get them and they're saying something
and it means
you're like,
nothing.
I don't know what you're saying.
Where is Google Translate for baby talk, right?
Exactly. That's what you're looking for, like that Google Translate, And just for parents to realize how frustrating that is for them and that they can't say, I have a poopy diaper. They can't say, I have a diaper rash. Like they can't say, I am starving right now.
Right.
Like we say that.
Right.
I cannot deal with this right now. I just need to sit down because I'm exhausted. Your toddler, even if they know how to talk, they're not going to say, I'm just exhausted right now. I can't handle you.
Right.
But that's maybe where they're at. And so we need to look at our child. And this is why I know some people don't have their kids on regular nap schedules or sleep schedules, and maybe they can read their child really, really well.
But when you don't do that, you have to be able to read your child.
You have to be able to read them really well, because I know from my own experience with kids, if I saw a child getting really upset, I would look at the clock and be like, you know what? They're upset because it's right before nap time. And that helped me as a mother.
We haven't had dinner or lunch yet.
Exactly.
Or
they normally eat around this time. They normally do this around this time. That's why it's not even a schedule that's important. It's a routine that's important.
Yeah.
To be able to know, okay, they've been up for this amount of time or whatever, to be able to learn how to read your child.
And when you, and in addition to this, reading your child, we also have to recognize, again, seeing kind of from the eyes of the child. You found this term called block goal attainment, meaning they may have a meltdown because they were blocked in a goal that they wanted to attain. Right. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, okay, now, again, we're not justifying or saying that their goal is a good goal.
Exactly.
Right. We're not giving into that, but even just determining and saying, okay, this is what they wanted. And they're stopped from that. They're impeded from going forward. And again, as an adult, we are frustrated when we have some objective, some goal, something that we either expect or want or desire, and we're blocked from getting it.
Yeah.
That's oftentimes what happens. Again, that doesn't mean what they want is reasonable and appropriate. But
maybe they want to keep playing on the iPad, and you're saying, no, we need to take that away. Like you are blocking what they want to do.
And just to have that understanding. And then and kind of along those lines, and it kind of goes back to something you said earlier, but the idea that there is a natural desire, particularly in those toddler times. And again, we've said this before, but there's a a correlation, or at least a very similar connection between the toddler years and the teen years, and in the sense that they are both sometimes they can have emotional reactions to things, and they're also at a place where they're growing a new sense of their will and a new sense of independence. And
so the toddler is becoming independent of the parents,
right,
from being a baby to being a school age child.
Right.
And the teen is becoming independent really from the family.
Yeah.
Okay. And
in a good way, right?
It has to happen.
Right.
Like it has to happen. And it gets frustrating.
And both of these are
when there's like young adults who should be launched, who are not, because their parents never allowed them to go through that time of independence, which is so important.
And these are vital developmental goals and goods that we, again,
can be very frustrating for parents.
But we have to recognize this is all for a good end, right?
That's
and even if they're seeking it and no matter what age, even if they're seeking it the wrong way, we have to understand this is part of their growth. Again, that doesn't mean that we allow them just to freely go wherever they want or follow those
and we'll get into
desires.
That. Yeah.
But knowing that on the front end, determining it will help you say, okay, this is where the path moves. So if, and I don't know if this is kind of blends into the next situation, but yeah, maybe we will.
To recognize that once you determine why they are freaking out, why are they having a meltdown?
Yeah.
Okay. You need to determine about that sorry, I said this the wrong way. Okay. That you giving in to what they want. Whether if it's an unreasonable goal, for example, they are going through the checkout line and they want a piece of candy and you say no, because that's not something that you don't want to do that every time, because then they'll keep asking, right? So if you give into them, then you are setting that expectation.
Right. You taught them a bad habit.
Right. That this is the way that you get what you want. You freak out because you want this kind of candy, then I will give it to you. You freak out because you want the iPad and I'm trying to take it away.
Yeah.
And so I'm just going to give it to you. Parents, now, please listen to the whole podcast, okay? Because we have some nuances on this. But for just as a starting point, in general, giving in to what they want, if it's something that is not good for them because of the way that they're acting, is a bad idea.
And one of the things I would often say is that we do not negotiate with terrorists. Okay. and meaning, you have a toddler who is melting down, who is, demanding things, and they're maybe very unreasonable. We do not.
Just maybe.
Well, maybe. But we do not negotiate in that situation. We as parents don't fall to the trap of, okay, this is the easy button. I'm just going to give them the candy. I'm going to just, whatever they want, here you go.
I'm going to give them the iPad. I'm going to give them the screen. I'm going to let them, whatever, keep doing what they want to do.
Because you don't want to teach them that this is the right and mature path going forward. However,
the wise parent will see, and this is why the determine is so important, right? The wise parent will maybe compromise by being able to see the situation through the eyes of the child. So, for example, with the going through the checkout line and they want a piece of candy, sometimes I would say, you know what? If you stop screaming right now, when we get into the car, I have fruit snacks. I will give you a fruit snack when we get into the car.
Right.
Okay. Or I would say, we'll get to this in a little bit. I have candy in the car.
Right. Don't get too ahead. Don't get ahead. I
have candy in the car. And when we leave here, if you stop crying right now, that's what I will give you. So I think, or if they want the iPad or the screen and it's time to put it away, I would say you may finish the game that you're playing right now, and then we're done. And then you need to give it to me.
Because when you determine in this first step, what's going on, what's happening and it's hard sometimes to see this in the moment. But if you were able to determine what's really going on, it also allows you to see, okay, there is a reasonable option here,
right,
that allows me and them to get what we want.
Right.
And you don't want to train them, but let's just say they have.
But you need to teach them the correct way to ask, really.
Let's assume for a second that your child, and this isn't true, but I'll be exaggerated, has zero self-control, or at least hasn't exhibited it. And
I'm sure there's parents out there who think their child has zero self-control. So go with this. That's good. This is good. This is good.
So you recognize and say, okay, my long-term goal, not a short-term fix. My long-term goal is that I'm building up a habit of doing good, right? Mm-hmm. And that I want to train and form their heart and their mind and their will toward the good. Therefore, I look at this and say, you know what? This X, they're actually, well, and again, we'll get into this more. It's like, but that compromise is actually going to give, and I can do it in such a way that they exert some of their will.
Exactly.
But maybe I don't ask them for a full football field length of will, but maybe it's, okay, we're going to get a first down here.
That's right.
And we're going to move towards that. And so again, that's where we have to recognize what is the situation, where is it at, and apply it as the awesome, amazing parent that you are.
Yes. And I think that's where, and I will tell you, when I was a young parent, just using the grocery store example, I would think in my mind, I cannot give an inch.
Yes.
Or they will never obey me. And I just want to tell you, I just don't think that's true. I really don't. I think that you can give an inch. I think you can give a little bit. You can help and kind of meet them where they're at because of exactly what you just said. The goal is to help them, is to train their will. And this is, again, something that Maggie Radzik talked about. And we're going to keep coming back to that and help them choose the good. And maybe saying, I am going to give you nothing. You just need to make the choice to calm down, my 3-year-old in the grocery cart. You need to calm down right now. Be quiet. Guys, it's not going to happen. It is not going to happen. Just let go of that. And all you're going to do is frustrate yourself. But what you can do is, other than just giving them what they want, is to have that a little bit of a compromise on your end where you can allow them to choose the right thing, to allow them to exercise their will.
And a baby step as opposed to a mile.
Exactly.
All right, so that's the determine. And then the second tactic that we want to use is diffuse. And by diffuse, we mean there's a bomb that's ready to go off. That's what I had. When we say diffuse, I'm like, do we mean like watering something down, or do we mean actually diffusing a bomb? I think we mean diffusing a bomb.
Well, I kind of thought.
I that's what I'm picturing.
Okay, all right. So we're picturing two different things. That's fine. That's fine. Diffusing a bomb. Can I just say my picture? My picture would be diffuse like, it's like the temperature is very high and you open the windows and you just kind of like diffuse the hot air, diffuse the temperature in the room. All
right. So my example is the synapses in your brain when we get angry fuse together, right? So we can't think straight. We are, our kids are, and sometimes us too, right? With
That's
the synapses,
true.
we're not thinking straight. And we are like a bomb that is ready to explode. Like it's just ready to go off, right? Or maybe they are going off, and you're diffusing it you're like disconnecting some of those wires. You're cutting the red wire so that it no longer explodes.
Or I should say you're trying to,
right?
But that's the tactics right.
So,
of this time.
So that is the diffusing. And this kind of goes back a little bit to the determining. Like, is there a simple solution to what's going on here? Because we as parents are supposed to be trying to take down that temperature. Yeah. We're trying to defuse that bomb that's ready to go off. And we want to maybe offer empathy. Maybe we want to look at the situation and say, okay, hey, you know what, honey, I hear where you're coming from.
Yeah, I know
really
this. You're so sad right now. That's what I would do with my grandchildren now a lot when they're like upset and they're freaking out or something. And because they're trying to do something, it's not working. I would say, that really stinks. Yes. Oh, that's so hard. Or if they hurt themselves, oh, I hate it when I fall down. Like that empathy, that's part of the diffusing. Bring the temperature down. That's letting them know.
And that's probably more your analogy, right?
Well,
which is good.
Yeah,
which is true.
Well, either way. I mean, but it's the same end,
But then the way that I, as a dad, would look at that synapses that are fused together, I think a way that I cut some of those cords is, and to allow them to think more clearly, is using dad jokes.
Right.
Again, and it could be seen as taking the temperature down or what have you, but it's like, okay, I'm using some dad jokes to use humor as a means by which that I get back in and I get a chink in the armor, if you will, and start them thinking again. Laughter is a great way to diffuse.
And like we saw this one video, so 2 examples of diffusing. So there's lots of ways you can do this depending on their age. We were just watching this video of like this little kid, a 2-year-old, screaming and crying by the door. And the dad just starts jumping over her, just being ridiculous. And the child just starts laughing. Why did that father do that? Number one, he was able to keep his own emotions in check and recognize that, hey, I am not going to start getting upset as well when my child is upset, because that's the opposite of diffusing. You are elevating the temperature in the room. It's like, just think about another adult. You're arguing with another adult. If you start yelling, they're going to start yelling. It's like that fight or flight response, that's going to happen. So some people are going to just shut down and some people are going to keep fighting you. You don't want either of those things. Another example, I was at my sister's house and my nephew who is, older, not a toddler, was having a temper tantrum and somebody else was trying to talk him out of it. And I went behind that person and just started making funny faces and jumping up and down and like waving my arms. And it actually worked. I was able to distract him, which kind of gets to the next thing.
They're sliding right into it. That's right.
But also just kind of bringing the temperature down in saying, because if you say to your child through your temper or through your actions, if you're very, very serious about this, then you're saying to them, this is a dangerous situation. This is an emergency situation. And guess what? It's really not. And let's diffuse the situation. And just like that dad jumping over the kid, it's okay. Yeah. It's all right.
And I think 2 and 3, meaning the diffuse and then our next one, which is distract, are very closely related. It's hard to.
But I just want to point out about the diffuse. What I think the big thing is there is the emotional temperature and bringing in the strategy of helping that child's emotions be seen.
Yeah, okay, they're not stuffing them. They're not saying they're wrong.
Exactly.
And say, I understand why you're frustrated.
Right. And I think that's because distract is like, we're going to ignore your emotions, and we'll get to that. And I think there's a place for that. But I do think that part of that diffuse is sending the message to your child.
Yeah.
I see that you're angry. I see that you're sad. I see that you're frustrated, and kind of like coming down to them and connecting with them. But then you just can't connect with them and stay there.
Yeah.
Unless things get better. Maybe that's enough. But if that's still not doing it, you got to start bringing them up, which gets the next thing.
Yeah, because we don't want to, we want to empathize with our children, but we don't want them or us to wallow in their emotions either, because that's not helpful to them. It doesn't leave them at a good place. Which leads us to distraction, which I really do. One day I will write a whole book on parenting by distraction. It would be a bestseller. I have so many great ideas about how to parent by distraction. But when your kids are having an emotional meltdown, when they're having that tantrum, distracting them. Look, hey, squirrel, there is something that's very powerful about that. And it could be something as simple, as, you talked about the physical activity. I always think of that as a great distraction, is that if you, and it doesn't work, if they're really in meltdown mode, you've got to, kind of get there somehow. Right. And maybe it's changing the subject, such that kind of like the squirrel thing, where it's like, okay,
depending on how old they are,
it depends on and think about, hey, like I most recently had a child who was having a very emotional situation, and changing the subject to something that they were interested in and excited and looking forward to. And I said, hey, when we're going on the trip, did you want to do blank, 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 or were you thinking more like this?
Right.
And again, it's trying to get the synapses to not be fused together, to give them free flow and thought. And it really, again, orients them away from maybe the wallowing in their emotional or lack of emotional control, and moving them more towards their getting some cognitive abilities back.
Right.
And sometimes those things take on an intellectual level, meaning we're having a conversation.
Right.
But sometimes they take on a physical level. Like you talked about the parent who was running around their kid and jumping over them just to make them laugh. There's some physical that's just kind of distracting them from what's going on.
If you think about it, like the child going through the grocery line again, we're just going to keep going back to that.
Yes. It happened to us there.
Yes. What would happen if all of a sudden a clown went by, or a big stuffed animal character, like that toddler?
The clown might be creepy.
I know, maybe
today,
possibly.
Clowns have become creepy.
Maybe it would be But if it was like one of those, like a big Easter bunny or Santa Claus came by, that child would be distracted.
Yeah.
You know, like, is there something? Can you give them something else?
Right.
You know, put something else into their hands. Do they have a favorite toy? You know, can you point out something? Can you distract them somehow?
Tell me how we would prepare for a road trip, and what would we have in place when our kids were...
yes. Okay. So this is also a big distraction and I think that this also kind of goes to the diffuse, to be honest with you. I would still do this now. So when in our car, I would always have a bag of what I would call emergency candy.
It's kind of like behind a glass plate that says, in case of emergency, break glass, get the candy out. You know?
So emergency candy, I would keep in the glove compartment or whatever. And if I had a child having a meltdown, I would say, hey, you want a lollipop? You know, or we just found out from our nephew, he said that his dad had what he would call Skittle Smiles. He would have a pack of Skittles on a trip. And if the kids were fighting or crying or screaming in the background, he would be like, okay, you give me a smile, I'll give you Skittles. Let me see Skittle Smiles.
Skittle Smiles.
And I was like, that's genius, but that's the distraction. And now actually, I think with the lollipops, they were always dum-dums, you know, because they're pretty small,
right?
You know, pretty small. You can even give them to a toddler. They're not going to choke on them.
Just in case, if you're not familiar with that lollipop, we weren't calling our kids dum-dums.
Exactly. No. It was the lollipops. I'm still a big fan. And the unwrapping of the lollipop is a skill in itself.
Yep,
give it to them wrapped up. If they are not able to unwrap it because they're freaking out too much, unwrap it and stick it in their mouth. Because I do think, though, that there is something primal about sucking on something, like even when you are, because that's what the first thing a baby does.
That's right.
Right. And so when a child is very upset, I think that's why kids would like suck their thumb, suck their hand. Hey, suck on a lollipop.
Right.
You know, and also, I hate to say this, but it's like sugar. Sugar works.
Yeah.
It just does.
It's magic.
It just does.
It's magic.
I'm sorry. Sugar just works. I remember homeschooling and thinking, it is amazing what kids will do for an M&M. Like for a little bit, hey, you do these 10 packs, I'll give you an M&M, you know?
And it's not bribery, right?
You know, it doesn't work with grapes. It doesn't work with frozen peas. I'm sorry, but it just worked with sugar. So these are the kinds of things that I think that those kinds of distractions, I'm sorry, but that actually works. And I think sometimes kind of going back to like the whole hangry thing, if a child is freaking out,
and
because maybe they're having like a low blood sugar, you know, or whatever, giving them a lollipop that kind of like can help bring the blood sugar back up, as well as be a distraction, as well as be just something that kind of diffuses the situation, you know? So just example of my granddaughter, one of my granddaughters, actually this has happened to all of them, when it's time to leave Noni's house,
right? Our house,
which is our house, they fall on the ground and start screaming and they don't want to leave, which is very sweet. You know, they're basically, so Nora, their oldest, who's now 5, she doesn't do this anymore. So now she just starts to cry. But when she's like 2 or 3, she would like lie on the ground screaming and wouldn't put on her anything because,
coat, shoes.
And so I would come over to her and I would say, kind of compromise a little bit and say, can I put you in the car? Do you want me to put you in the car? I will help you.
Because you were the reason that they were crying.
Because I was the reason that she was crying.
Because everybody loves Noni.
So, and if that didn't work, I would say, I'll give you a lollipop. I'd have a lollipop or a bit of candy or something. And I would just whisper to her and I'd say, if I can put on your coat and your shoes and carry you to the car when you're buckled in the car, then I'll give you a lollipop. But you need to stop crying right now, you know? And it would work almost every time. It would always work.
And so don't tell their parents though.
No, I would usually ask Cassie. And when they started saying yes, I just stopped asking because I knew they were going to say yes. I would say, can I give her a lollipop? And I would say, yeah, sure, whatever. You do it. And so then what would happen? Then cute thing, it turned into like every time it was time to leave, Nora would look at me and she would say, Noni, will you put me in the car? Will you put me in the car? And so then it was like this little routine. But
then what happened is the candy was no longer needed.
Exactly.
And
we'd kind of get to that.
And so again, but doing that, just to put it out there, you may have to go from, okay, you gave him the hard drugs and then you need to go to the patch and then the gum, and then you slowly wean them off of this addiction.
Because sometimes I don't always have candy in the house. We're not big candy people.
Yeah,
so,
and we don't think that should be used on every occasion and all the time.
That's why it's called emergency candy.
Emergency. All right. So, but let's just to kind of repeat. So in the determining, so if we start with that, we figure out, okay, they're just hungry. Feed them. Right?
Yeah.
Or they're tired. They need a nap. Give them a nap,
Yeah.
But then if you haven't determined enough to figure out what was going on.
Or if it's something that you can't fix.
That's right.
It's just
or
the way
it's unreasonable or inappropriate,
exactly.
right? And then you go to diffuse. And it's like both giving them empathy, and really bringing that temperature down, trying to kind of re-engage their mind. But then if that doesn't work, then you distract them, right? You use
change the subject.
And then when you get to this, we're like, oh, then it ends there. And I'm like, well, I feel like just to kind of confirm for all of you, if you're walking through this, just because your child is having an emotional reaction, as you already said, we cannot have an emotional reaction. That would add gas to a fire. It doesn't help. It doesn't help. And it's also not good for you or for them.
Right. And you have to be the adult in the room.
It undermines who you are and the authority that you need to be in their lives. So the fourth tactic is just, you're done. Okay. Meaning that you've gone through your pathway. You've really done your level best as an adult to help them. And you have to just say, we're done. And again,
what does that mean?
I've had this I've had it more than once. A child who has lost their ability. And I've gone through these other three strategies and tactics, and it hasn't yielded anything. Again, and you have to determine what this looks like for the age of your child, the personality of your child. In this situation that I'm thinking about right now, I just looked him in the face and said, we're done. You're either going to pull yourself together, or there's going to be a consequence to this. And for another, it might be, and because you have to kind of draw a line in the sand, because if they're willing to fight on that, die on that hill, are you? Yeah. And you might look at it and say, you know what? It's not disrupting the household, what's happening, and it's not really unsafe for them. Maybe I'm going to ignore it. Maybe that's what you're done with. You're pulling back, or you're just going to
kind of allowing them, like you've given the empathy and they're still crying and being like, okay, well then you're allowed to cry, but you need to go to your room until you get yourself together. And that's then, you don't have to engage the entire time with a child who is having a hard time getting their emotions under control.
Even put before them, kind of like we did before with the distraction, you talked about the M&M, and it's like, well, when you're done,
yes,
then I'll be downstairs and I'll watch a show with you, or I'll read a book with you, or I'll play a game with you,
right?
Or hey, when you're done doing this, we're going to go and do X,
right?
To lure them out, to give them some motivation, maybe, but you should then step back.
I'm going to paint a little broader picture of this situation that Mike is thinking of. Happened with one of our daughters at some point in time. We have 6 daughters. So, she was about 11 years old, and she was upset because she had cleaned the kitchen and didn't do a good job. And so I had to go get her, and she was ready to just like go and do what she wanted to do. And I had to go get her and say, this is not done.
Yeah.
And I will do it with you, because I know there was a lot to do.
That's right.
So I was like, I will do it with you. But as I was working with her, she was just starting to devolve. She was getting angrier and angrier and angrier. And I was saying, I am here to help you. If you don't stop this bad attitude, I'm going to leave. And she said, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. She was just getting, so she started spiraling. Okay. This turned into her crying and crying. She goes upstairs,
and
goes
wallowing
her room,
in her,
slams the door.
Life is unfair.
Exactly. I go upstairs, diffuse, right? Talking to her. I know this is really hard for you. Giving the empathy.
That's right.
Saying, I know you're really upset right now. I was hugging her, right? And she was
mention of diffusing, but actually that's a really important part is the physical.
Yes.
Because there is something powerful about human connection.
Yes.
And the physicality of our love. We are not just speaking love, we're showing physically that affection. That's really important.
I think that touching, holding a child when they are comforting them, even if they're struggling, just like holding them, just because it's like that connection can really help. Trying that, she calmed down for a little bit, but then she just kept going and going. And she's just crying and crying and crying. And she was just so upset, so angry. So I'm trying and I was like, look, come downstairs. I will do this with you. We will have ice cream together.
Yeah.
Again, sugar, right? Nope. She wasn't having any of that. Even the distracting, trying to talk about other things, saying, look, let's do this. Nothing worked.
Yeah.
And then I was like, you know what? I'm just going to let her keep crying until she gets herself together. She literally was in her room crying for an hour. Then Mike came home and I said, you need to go deal with this. I'm not kidding. So that's when he went upstairs. He tried to distract her, do some of these tactics, and it didn't work. So you know what he did? He basically said exactly, and this is why this is underdone. He said, we're done. If you don't get yourself under control, you're going to be grounded. You will not have any electronics for the rest of the day. You need to stop crying right now. Now, you can't do that with a 3-year-old.
That's correct.
But you can do that with an 11-year-old. And you know what? She stopped.
Yeah.
She pulled it together.
It took a little bit, but she did it.
She did. And he just sat there and just had to be a wall.
Yeah. And that's really what it is.
Had to be a wall of saying, because she needed to engage the frontal cortex, the decision-making part of her brain. She needed to say, I need to stop my body. I need to stop crying and then start taking that one step forward, one at a time. And I was downstairs. She came downstairs and she gave me a hug. She wasn't crying anymore. She was kind of like a little, and
right.
Mike was right behind her and said, I told you to stop crying. And she stopped and she hugged me and she goes, I have a headache. And I said, of course you have a headache.
Why do you think
you've been crying for an hour and a half?
Right.
And so that's what I would say to those people who are like, no, you just need to let them cry until the temper tantrum burns itself out. I would say, no, do not do that. That's cruel. Because if we had left her up there, she literally would have cried herself to sleep. Yeah. And I'm not going to do that to my child.
Right.
I'm not. And you know what happened? She stopped crying. I was able, the synapses were able to diffuse.
That's right.
Because she had to make the decision. It's almost again, like Mike had to make the decision for her, meet her at that place, and she could lean on his decision. Just like we were saying with empathy. They need the empathy. They need that, okay, I understand you're upset. You're so sad. And they can lean on you for that empathy, right? Sometimes they need to lean on you for that, I need to stop crying.
And again, long term, this is not the solution. This is
you do that when everything else has failed.
Right. And you do this recognizing that the goal still is that they have learned internal self-control, right? But the done is stepping back and saying, okay, we have gone through all the paces. We have thoughtfully treated you with dignity, respect, both your emotions and everything. And now we're at the place where it's no longer good for you.
And I think that still is treating them with dignity and respect. One of the things
you found that was founded on, so you didn't get to this point like 0 to 60. You didn't just go like, okay, we're done.
Totally.
It gave them time to process, gave them time to diffuse, distract, and all of that. Right. Exactly.
The one thing I was thinking when we were talking about this before is that you need to talk to your children the way that you would talk to yourself. Okay. I think maybe not men, but I think most women who are listening to this have been in a situation where you are crying so hard and you just can't stop. Yes, okay. I have been in that situation in my life where I had to literally just say to myself, I need to stop crying.
Yeah.
It was not, the situation wasn't solved. My emotions were still there. I was still struggling, but I had to say to myself, I need to stop crying. And that's what we need to do for our children because they're not able to do that.
Yeah.
And so with that story with our daughter, we were able to get her some ibuprofen, to bring down her headache, get a drink of water.
And it was a good evening after that.
And then we could talk about what led up to that. Because, and this is why.
And it's a teaching moment, right?
Yes. And this is why parents, you cannot teach your child in the midst of a tantrum. That is a fool's errand, people. You need to get out of the tantrum. You can't say you need to learn how to control yourself. They can't right then. They need to get out, unfuse the synapses, right? Get out of the situation.
Right.
And then talk about it, which kind of leads us for our kind of closing thoughts on this.
And really the best approach to a tantrum is to avoid it altogether. And the best way to win a war is to not go to war. Right?
That's right. And we were talking about The Art of War by Sun Tzu. Everyone should read that. It's actually, sometime we should do a like parenting according to The Art of War.
I will.
But one of the things is, and that is a principle from The Art of War, is the best way of winning a war is don't go to war, negotiate, right? Before you go to war.
Yep.
The other is go into war with the army you have, not the army you wish you had.
Right.
Okay. So if you are going to go to war, if we'll put war in quotes, obviously, if you're going to go to war with your child, you need to make sure that you yourself are at a good place.
And that's the idea of know thyself, right?
Right.
Meaning if you are at a place where you're hangry, you're hungry, you're angry, you're
Exactly.
tired, and you look at, okay, I'm going to ask this child to do X, Y, or Z. And in the past, there's been pushback, there's been emotional reaction. You don't do this forever, but if you are at a position where you are not going to respond with charity and the wisdom of a good parent, they maybe say, let's not go to that battle. Let's not enter that field.
So I'll give an example, practical example. End of the day, the kitchen is dirty. It's your 8-year-old's job to clean the kitchen. You had a really hard day. You're not in a good place. If you ask the 8-year-old to clean the kitchen, they're going to freak out. You know what I would say? And again, I'm telling you, when I was a young parent, in my mind, I was like black and white. I was like, nope, it's their chore. They have to do it. End of discussion.
Right.
Like I have to make them do that or they will never listen to me ever again. That's not true. That's not true. It's much better to look at the situation, assess the situation, assess the battlefield.
Assess yourself.
Assessing yourself, assessing the battlefield, and be like, you know what? I'm going to tell them they should go to their room now and read a book, and I'm just going to do the kitchen. And then the 10-year-old will say, well, that's not fair. And you just say, you know what, 10-year-old, this is my decision right now. Thank you very much. This is my decision. So don't go to battle with your child unless you're really not ready.
And again, that doesn't mean you give up on every one of those fronts, that you don't do it all the time, but it means that you're smart, you're prudent.
Exactly.
You look at the situation and you make a determination. Yes. And then other simple things that you can do to avoid getting into tantrums in the first place is just having special time. We're big fans of the one-on-one time between mom and dad or one of the parents with a child. So
you know why? Because rules without relationship breeds rebellion. Okay. What is rebellion? You ask your child to do something and they say no. Why? Do they need attention? They don't trust you. They're not in a good place right then. How can you fill them up? How can you fill up that child? And so you have a relationship with them, especially when they're teenagers. It is so, so important that you can have those conversations with them and that they feel seen by you.
And I think that those times of transition for kids is a key time to really pour into them so that they know they are loved.
What do you mean by times of transition?
So that when they're going through those different planes of development, so they're hitting another developmental milestone. They're really stretching into a new level of independence or exertion of their will or a new kind of level of.
So planes of development are basically sixes. So 0 to 6, then 6 to 12, and 12 to 18.
Right.
So 6 to 7 is a new plane.
Times,
That's
right?
6 to 7 is a transitional time. 11 to 12 is a transitional time. 17 to 18, transitional time.
And so when you are able to pour in with that special time, getting to know them in a way at a new level, helping them not see themselves as a pure child or even just a little elementary student or whatever the transition point is, you investing in that relationship, them knowing you because they need you, mom and dad. They need you. They are not supposed to, and they can't do this on their own. They need you to help them, guide them along the way. And so giving them your time, giving them your special time, if you will, and then giving them freedom within limits, meaning even for a toddler, like figuring out what's age appropriate, where I don't think they should be given, what do you want to wear today? What do you want to go to? No. Don't overwhelm them with choices. But when it's appropriate, it's like, hey, do you want an apple or an orange? Hey, do you, and then later as they're older, giving them freedom within the age appropriate bounds, because then it gives them, because again, they have frustrations. They have that what do they say? The avoidance. What was it? The desired object, what was the earlier term that we found for it? Blocked goal attainment. When we can give them the freedom within bounds
to achieve their goal, that, hey, this is a desire you have for this. Yeah. You're going to give them the freedom to get there. That gives them a sense of autonomy. That gives them a sense of independence. It gives them an ability to use their will in a wise and helpful way. Because again, it's not about controlling your child. That's right.
It's about forming their heart and their habits for a lifetime.
Right.
And that's what we're all about.
And so even like the example you said about like determining what they would wear. Hey, you can wear anything in this drawer. Yeah. And guess what? If they want to wear two things that don't match, who cares? As long as it's something that's in the drawer that you have determined what's in the drawer. So they're not wearing shorts and a t-shirt like in December,
Right.
But you determine that. I was reading something recently where they said like, you should have your child have natural consequences. If they don't want to wear a coat, then they're going to be cold. And I thought maybe if they're like 10 or 11, but I wouldn't say that to a 3 or 4-year-old. No, I am going to make them wear a coat.
Absolutely.
Because that is what is good for them at school. They don't know. They can't go ahead and think, 3 hours from now, I'm going to be at recess and we're playing outside for a half an hour and I should be wearing a coat during. They can't think that way. So yes, you do make your child wear a coat. You can say, hey, you can put on the coat or I'll put on the coat. How do you want to do it? But the choice isn't there. So the idea of natural consequences across the board for all kids is stupid. I'm sorry, it's stupid. But I would say for a teenager, can they determine whether to wear a coat or not?
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Hey, you don't want to wear a coat? Fine. Then do not complain when we're walking around the zoo and you're freezing.
Yeah.
I would say that to them. I wouldn't say that to a 3-year-old or even a 6-year-old, to be honest with you. I'd be like, no, you really need to wear a coat.
All right. So how does that sound? I feel like we gave you 4 tactics to determine, diffuse, distract, and then done.
That's right.
And that's the pathway we think to a wise, smart parenting.
I think the wise part really comes in with the avoiding the battles altogether.
Yeah.
How can you do that? To really look at, again, I'm putting in quotes, the battlefield, because I do hate, because relationships shouldn't be a battle, but still, but really being wise and prudent in the standards that you're having for your children.
Should we do these or no?
Yeah, sure. I think this so couples discussion. So things to talk about with your spouse. First of all, I really think that you should talk to your spouse about those 4 things. And we have this in our notes underneath the podcast here. But to talk about, when do our children have meltdowns and why?
Yeah.
Really look at it. When does this happen? How can we change the environment? How can we manage our environment? Why? What can we do? Then what is some strategy to proactively avoid tantrums, which we just talked about? But then really, this is the most important thing. How can we as a couple, as mom and dad, be more effective in responding to our children's tantrums?
And the reason this is so important that you have this conversation is because you want to be on the same page. You want to support each other. If both mom and dad are working, you come back if one's at home, so that you're actually doing the same thing. You're responding in a similar way. That kind of unity helps form the child. And when you are on the same page, even if you're not home but you're supporting the other parent, that makes all the difference. Your unity is so powerful.
And I just want to say one little note, because I know we have a lot of women listeners, and then people will contact us and say, something like, we would say our biggest problem in our marriage is that we're on different pages in regards to discipline. I would really encourage your husband to either listen to this podcast or on a date night or something, have a time where you are out of the situation and you have this conversation, because your disunity as a couple really hurts your child.
Right.
And so you guys need to be on the same page if you're going to do this.
Okay. Well,
let's say a prayer.
All right.
We almost forgot.
That's right. Ready? In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, we ask you to bless all those messy families, all those families that are listening. Lord, that you would be in their heart and their mind, that you would give them the wisdom and the charity and the courage they need to raise their kids, to raise them in this crazy mixed up world. Lord, we thank you for the great gift of our marriages and for the families, and to provide for us in our time of need. In your name we pray. Amen. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Hope you've enjoyed today's episode. If you have, let us know. Rate us on iTunes as well as share it with a friend. And until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you.